So just wanted to do a little bit of a walk around here on the processor. This isn't something I built, it's something I bought, and it didn't really work very well, so the fella had sold it at a fairly reasonable price, and I've gone ahead and made some changes to it. The biggest problem was that this Wisconsin engine is only about 12 horsepower and wasn't up to wouldn't put out the power that this unit needed to make that pump work. It's got a good pump on it, which is capable of up to about 40 gallons a minute, but it's only single flow, and the motor just was insufficient. So we're no longer using the hydraulic tank here at the moment, or the engine, or the pump. We're running it off of this skid steer loader, which has a high flow additional pump on it, which gives us, instead of 15 gallons a minute, up to 24 at full throttle. So the processor has a hydraulically driven live deck and hydraulically driven in-feed chain. It's built on a tandem axle trailer with house trailer axles. I'm not sure the displacement on, there's two identical motors, one running the live deck and a second one that runs the saw in-feed. The clamp roller, it's not driven at this point, it's just an idler, although it could be driven. The splitter cylinder is a 3.5-inch bore. The chainsaw motor, I'll just give you a video of the tag. It's about a 0.2 cubic inch, and it's had this adapter made to go from a keyed shaft to a power saw. I believe that's a 22 millimeter driver for a steel saw, and we're running a 10 tooth rim sprocket on it, which so the chain gets driven with 10 teeth. Approximately 22 gallons a minute or so coming through this from the skid steer, which makes the saw cut reasonably well. The oiler for the saw is just a gravity feed tank through a shut-off valve. Originally it dripped on top of the chain, but that did not work very well, so we plumbed it into the side of the bar like the saw does. There's the splitter off setup here. It's just a single wedge right now, a two-way split, and I'd want to make some updates here because right now the pusher bar does not wrap around the beam wraps around the pusher, but it tends to build up with sawdust and bark in there, and that causes a problem. I cut the end of it open on this end so it could eject the debris out, because it's hard to see, but it's actually bending those pieces of angle iron up away from the beam. It just has a positive log stop on it. The saw is manually fed. You just pull it down by hand and it basically falls down by itself once it comes over center. The splitter tray back here needs, or the catches the wood, this tray needs some more work done to it too, as it misses quite a few of the sticks, but we're just nicely getting this unit running, so we're kind of in testing stage. So you can see here we have a number 120 roller chain. It's got some biters welded on it. I believe that's 80 chain on the live deck, and all the other chains to the hydraulic motors are 60 series. The saw is just a standard power saw bar, 3/8 chain, nothing 72 drive link, 18 or 20-inch bar. Over here we have the valve for the splitter, which is an auto return. Then it goes through, the flow comes into it, goes into the valve for the hydraulic chainsaw motor, and then this is where I made changes and put in a flow divider here, available from Surplus Center, and I can adjust the flow that continues on to this valve, this 3-bank valve, and the remainder returns to tank, because these other functions, the in-feed deck and chain feeding the saw and the clamp cylinder, were way too fast. So this way here, only a portion of the flow goes to these 3 valves, which reduce that back down to a reasonable level. You can see that's the clamp cylinder. It's just a small bore cylinder, and the clamp has a pivot with a spring in it that allows the roller to ride over knots and lumps in the log. Most of the time I still find it works better to lift it off the log to feed forward. At some point I'd like to put an additional driven roller here in front of the sprocket to replace this. I had added that piece of steel because some of the short pieces, when you're down to the last cut, wanted to tilt down, but this piece also puts quite a bit of drag and prevents the log from advancing sometimes. So basically from there, the oil just returns back to the skid steer, and these other two pipes here from the original motor, they're just looped around and not being used. And this line returns back to, well, I guess the pressure is here and the return is here back to the skid steer loader. There's a winch here to lift the live deck up for transportation to get it down to a legal width. This old muffler and this old Wisconsin engine and fuel tank will be coming off someday, and I'd like to replace it with a 50 or 60 horse diesel engine. You can see this is a Vickers pump here on it, and I believe that's capable of up to 20 gallons a minute, but this motor was only driving it at 1/3 RPM, and so it was only 24 gallons when the motor was revved up, but as soon as you engaged the function, then it fell back, or I'm sorry, only 12 gallons revved up, and then when you engaged the function, it fell back to 8 gallons a minute. And the belts were actually slipping some too, but I don't think regardless the motor could ever put out any more. It lugged down pretty bad. Old generator fuel tank, and then we're back to the reservoir here. So not a real fancy unit, somebody's idea from quite a while ago, and a few improvements have come along in the meantime that make these more functional and quicker, so I'm looking at making some updates. But anyway, that gives you a pretty good idea of what the unit looks like.